With this introduction, may I invite Jesse for your presentation. I think, Jesse, you wanted to share the slides, so I'll request the team at the back end to allow him to share his recent slides. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ujwal, for that introduction. And yes, if it is okay for me to share my screen, that would be great. But if it's already sort of set in place, that's fine as well. So first, just wanted to thank the organizers for inviting me to speak. I echo Kim that I also wish I could be there, and frankly, after Sonam's presentation, wish I could be in Ladakh as well. This is normally just after the time that I read several books to my sons before putting them to bed, so I really appreciated you know, thinking about literature and stories from Kim and having that clear-eyed but hopeful view of what the future could be. I think we're often placed into either we're doomsayers or we are quixotic in our approaches to climate and solutions. And so now I'm incredibly inspired by what you're doing and want to learn a lot more about all the actions that you're taking. So I don't know if my presentation will be as evocative, but I will do my best. I was going to speak a bit on the work of the governance work that we are doing and the work of our partners to make climate actions more responsive to the needs of different populations, rooted in good governance, and ultimately likely to lead to more equitable outcomes. In other words, we know that climate change is inherently unjust, and how do we reduce and eliminate that injustice? And can we start with decision-making processes? In other words, when plans and strategies and policies are being developed, who is at the table? Who can influence them? How do they know that their voice is being heard? And if governments are swayed by powerful, moneyed, oftentimes polluting vested interests, what is their recourse that they have to challenge delays, to challenge the lack of implementation, and we know, every one of us in this room knows how there is just no time to delay to try to reach the 1.5 degrees Celsius or even 2 degree target. So oh, there's my share screen. Thank you so much. I will share my screen and go through a quick presentation. Okay. And just make sure it's in presenters mode. Sorry about that. Are you able to see the slide deck in its full screen format?
Yes, Jesse, it's clear.
Okay. So as I mentioned, I'm with as Ujwal mentioned, I'm with the World Resources Institute. I am based just outside of Washington, D.C., but we are a global organization with offices in Indonesia, India, China, Africa, Europe, Brazil, Mexico, and the United States. Quickly, our mission is to move human society to live in ways that protect the Earth's environment and its capacity to provide for the needs and aspirations of current and future generations. Our values as an organization are integrity, innovation, urgency, independence, and respect. And I think that comes out, hopefully, in this presentation as well. And specifically where I work in the Equity Center, we work with governments, civil society, citizens, and the private sector to address issues that matter the most to vulnerable communities. We focus a lot on social and financial equity, poverty, adaptation to climate change, environmental rights, and that's the area of focus of my team, pollution, and responsive government. So we ask questions such as who benefits and who suffers when governments act, who has a seat at the table and who is left out, and what do citizens need to shape policy. So this list is from one of our major reports, our State of Climate Action report from late last year, and I just put it up here to show you. It's sobering, and perhaps what you might already know, but these are all key targets that we have sort of collected from the literature and different different areas of expertise, and you can see that the green check in terms of change is occurring at the pace needed. There's nothing there. This is all about systems change. It's from our systems change lab. So how do we encourage, how do we shift these systems, all these interconnected systems? Sonam was talking about, he was connecting the systems of food loss and waste, and carbon emissions and transport and diesel transport and the water system and so forth. So all of these systems are interconnected. You can see that most are well off track, or even some are headed in the wrong direction. So we know that we have to make a critical change rapidly, really shift trajectories this decade. Some encouraging news is that even during the midst of a pandemic, of geopolitical conflict, cyber attacks, and everything else, this is from a 19-country survey. Climate change came out the highest on average of concern. So we know that people are seeing the impacts. They're maybe feeling the impacts very personally. They know that it's serious. Just to follow up on that, another survey of 34 countries where people are feeling the effect of severe effect of climate change where they live, or even more so expect to be feeling those effects in the future. And you see a diverse set of countries there, and in some cases, and including in the South Asia region, say it's likely that they themselves may be displaced due to climate change in the next 25 years. That should not be a national or a regional concern. That should be a global concern. I mean, that is something that should drive ambitious action everywhere on climate change. So when we talk about so why has it, and we have this strong public concern. We know that there have been, we've seen climate activism around the world, sort of most notably, or often in the news, Greta Thunberg, but this network of youth activists around the world. But why haven't we seen, especially in wealthy countries, and Sonam, I appreciate that you did not want to target wealthy countries only, but I will take that and target wealthy countries. Why haven't we seen this translated to ambition? So here's some of the governance challenges, because my major takeaway from this, I want to say, is that what's blocking us is not technology, it's not knowledge at this point, it's politics and governance that is blocking what we need to have happen. So basically, on the left here, the higher emitters, the industrialized nations, the United States, I would include, Europe, I would also include Brazil and countries like that. The major governance challenges that they're experiencing are, in many cases, not all, but in many cases, deeply entrenched carbon-intensive industries that have deep networks with both elected officials and bureaucracies, and can really influence policy decisions and policies in many different ways, and are very tied in, certainly in the United States, with key decisions that we've had where corporations are seen as individuals, as persons, and can make unlimited contributions to elections. Political capture and misinformation on the causes and costs and benefits of climate action. This is worse in some countries. Certainly, it's something that's worse in the United States, also Australia to some extent than other countries. But that has been a major cause of delay. And then insufficient political urgency, especially from elites, wealthy, who feel that they might be insulated from impacts. The column in the middle is what I see as governance challenges that apply to both low emitting and high emitting countries. So I'll just run through them really quick. The benefits, I think this is something that is You know, Kim said near-term science fiction, you know, a week off. And so I'm interested to think about how we, you know, paint a picture of different climate futures and try to shift that window of where politicians see the benefits from the actions they take on climate. But historically, the issue has been that the benefits from, you know, emission reductions or investments that might pull away from other priorities would not be seen in their election cycle. And so why would they want to do it? There's climate change just cuts across everything. So the challenge of just coordinating all these different ministries that may not work well together, sharing information and data, not being redundant, working together from cities to national governments, especially if their political parties aren't the same. It's a major challenge everywhere. We know that climate change is happening. It's happening everywhere, but the uncertainty regarding the cost, the effectiveness, the risks of future mitigation technology has sort of caused some to, you know, be unsure of how they're going to meet their targets, as well as the uncertainty on the magnitude and the timing of climate impacts. That's no excuse for inaction, but it means you have to build in the ability to learn as we go, be flexible in the approach to solutions and how we implement them, but set clear targets and give clear signals to, you know, to businesses that they're being expected to meet these targets, and civil society as well. Oversight and enforcement. I think one of our biggest challenges is no longer is it really getting governments and businesses to make lofty commitments, you know, net zero by 2050. It's what mechanisms are we putting in place to ensure that if they're not on track, first of all, that the public knows that they're not on track, so that there's visibility, there's transparency. They know what their government is up to. What are their actual plans to meet these, you know, these lofty, sometimes difficult to understand climate commitments, and what actions can they take? What challenges can they make? Doesn't all have to be litigation, but we're seeing a lot of that too. Effective engagement of all stakeholders, and that I would even say, you know, especially those who are often left out, can't access, you know, decision-making forums because it's not in the capital, or they're only in the capital city, or it's not at times that are convenient to them, or they don't understand why it's relevant to their day-to-day life. And then developing an overarching narrative on the benefits of climate action. And then in lower emitting countries, typically less finance, lower state capacity, elite capture of public resources. That's something that can really happen in both, but especially around concerns around adaptation finance is used. And then lacking adequate access to climate finance, that has been obviously a major international failure, is meeting climate finance targets and enabling countries to adopt new technologies to critically to invest in adaptation. And that's why we're talking about loss and damage now. And then competing development priorities. That really, I think, is something that's more about understanding why addressing climate change is compatible with building sustainable development. So here's another major 40,000 people survey that shows that public support for climate policies hinges on the perception: are they going to be effective? Who benefits and who bears the cost? And what's the distribution of the cost and benefits? And do they benefit low-income households? And then personal self-interest: how does it affect me? And so I think the takeaway for that is, for climate policy advocates have to show how climate actions will prioritize low-income at-risk households, but still create visible benefits for all citizens and consumers. So there's a big effort to try to do that. There's been several efforts in the last few years in the United States, and hopefully they will bear, you know, both fruit in terms of lower emissions and better climate action, but also political fruit in terms of increased ambition, because we all know that the United States needs increased ambition. And that was in both something that we have called the Justice 40 initiative, where 40% of the benefits of executive actions need to go to communities that have been disproportionately impacted by environmental harms, and also our major new law from the past year that is an investment, the Inflation Reduction Act, but which is a major new, should kickstart clean energy investment in the United States in ways that hasn't happened before, and includes a lot of incentives for consumers to buy in and benefit. And that's the kind of thing that is likely to build longstanding public support. And why is this so critical? Because we can't assume that the public will support climate actions, because they can be developed in a way that that is inequitable, that burdens already disadvantaged or poor citizens with costs. Example is the over 40 riots that have taken place from 2005 to 2018, when countries tried to remove fossil fuel subsidies on fuel prices. And that's something that we absolutely have to do to meet climate goals. But if you do it in a way where there aren't direct assistance, strengthening social welfare nets, literal cash transfers and other types of mechanisms to poorer households, or those households where their car's fuel is a much greater percentage of their budget, we know, and governments and politicians know, they will feel the reprisals quickly. We've seen them in all across the world. And so how we develop those is critical to building that public support, to taking on these vested interests. So quickly, I think everybody probably already knows what I mean when I say climate equity, but we're talking about international equity between historically high emitters who have not met their emission or finance pledges, and a critical question of how soon should poorer countries be expected to reach net zero? Should richer countries have to take on a bigger share of the pie to enable a more gradual transition for them? Procedural equity, and that's what I focus on, making sure decision makers dedicate those resources to that marginalized and affected groups have the information, the ability to influence decisions, and to seek justice or accountability if those aren't implemented. The distributional equity, which I think is probably what most people think of in terms of are the least well-off prioritized for climate action benefits, who has been historically has not been able to benefit from government policies, or have been socioeconomically marginalized. And then intergenerational equity, the rights of future generations, which we are starting to see in some of the court cases as well. So just to kind of sum up here, how can governments channel public concern and climate activism into scientifically sound policy? These are just some kind of takeaways from the work that I've done and the work of partners. Like as Ujwal mentioned at the outset, we have a network of civil society organizations. A lot of those organizations have worked through research and activism, both legal policy activism, to strengthen these rights and also make them more effective and accessible to communities. For instance, communities in Indonesia living near rivers where different industries pollute, making sure they have access to data on pollution and water quality, and be able to use that information to initiate lawsuits or challenges. Make information on climate change and action easily available, link it to solving social and economic problems, lower barriers to participation, because just having public consultations isn't enough. In fact, it can sometimes even have perverse effects where those vested interests, those that are organized and aware and have the information and the resources, show up and influence policy. As an example, in my country, in the United States, we have public comment periods on all kinds of rulemaking and regulations. Over 90% of the comments received are from affected industries. In other words, those industries to whom the regulation is trying to change the behavior of are the ones that flood the agency with comments. And so that just gets to the point that we need to ensure that these that proactively seek the input of those who are adversely affected. Publish how governments have considered and responded to public input. That's something I hear all the time. Check complaints about checkbook or sort of checkbox public participation, where people show up, they give their input, and then they don't hear anything else. We have to recognize that equity is going to be contested. Not everyone's going to agree on what is fair. We are working on a report taking stock of climate assemblies that have taken place in Europe and elsewhere, deliberative processes like mini public citizen assemblies and citizen juries that build consensus on what should climate action priorities be. Protect the rights of activist media and indigenous land defenders, protect civic space, stop attacks, legal and violent attacks on activists, and build up establish coordination and independent advisory bodies to ensure policies reflect the most up-to-date science. So To end on a hopeful note, because I followed two really inspiring speakers. You know, we have seen massive amounts of climate lawmaking, over 2,000 laws enacted. We've seen courts being used, 450 lawsuits. I mean, this is an indication that, of course, things aren't on track, but it shows that, you know, these are having impacts in major countries like the UK, Ireland, Netherlands, and there's notable ones in Pakistan and elsewhere as well. Major net zero commitments. Now we need to see implementation and accountability. And we know that climate finance has to increase massively over the next 10 years to be able to reach these temperature targets. But we need that sustained activism to keep it on the political agenda. So I hope I've tried to connect here, you know, again, getting to what I was saying, you know, we have that action is so critical because, you know, more warming is very likely to mean more global insecurity, which might enable more authoritarian regimes and that is not likely to lead to socially equitable outcomes.
Jesse,
and build that groundswell of support so that
Jesse,
when laws get passed, if people
sorry
see
for the
benefits
interruption.
and they
Jesse,
benefit
can
from
you
it,
hear us?
they're going to make it much harder for future politicians to try to roll those laws back. And we need
Jesse, can you hear us? Sorry for the interruption.
I think that's about all I have. Sorry for running a little bit over. My brain is a little scattered at 11:30 at night, but thank you all.